Was 2023 a good year for robotics and automation? With lots of attention on generative artificial intelligence, you may have missed some big advances in the world of robots, as well as some missteps. On this episode of Today in Tech, we're going to dive into the robot world. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me in studio is Gene Demetri. He is the editorial director at WTWH Media's Robotics Group, which includes the media sites The Robot Report, Robotics Business Review, and others. Welcome to the show, Gene.
Thanks, Keith. It's great to be here.
Now, just as full disclosure, we work together. Both you and I have covered the robotic space in previous lifetimes. How long have you been covering robotics? About 10 years?
So almost 10 years.
Yeah. So you've got a good handle on everything from the early days of robotics to the current situation.
I know where some of the bodies are buried. Yes.
All right. So as we look back at 2023, what were some of the biggest stories in the year of robotics? Because and I'm going to follow up with some other questions. But as you look in your crystal ball, well, not the crystal ball, but look to the past.
Right.
Yeah. What stood out for in 2023?
If it wasn't for Gen AI, it would have been the year of humanoids.
Okay.
There have been 5 or 6 different companies in the past year that have unveiled humanoids. And whether or not they're ready for prime time, they're getting a lot of public attention.
Okay.
And other things that happened this past year, the first half of the year was really tough for the robotics industry. There were a lot of layoffs. Not so many company failures, but it's still the slowdown in e-commerce hit the whole industry.
Yeah.
So then the other thing that I would say happened later this year is autonomous systems, autonomous vehicles in particularly hit a big pothole or set of potholes.
Yeah.
And they were getting billions of dollars of investment. Obviously, that's now drying up.
Right.
And I had previously forecast a peace dividend, right? That all the investment in autonomous vehicles was going to trickle down to other forms of robotics. Obviously, that's not going to happen.
You haven't seen that yet, or you didn't see it at all?
No, we didn't really see much of that.
So let's talk about humanoid robotics too, because again, first in this space, what is it that made them have a better year than in previous years? Because it always felt like there was always this divide in the robotics industry about, well, do I make a robot look like a human, or do I make it, more utility or do things that humans can't do, which includes the shape of it? And I think our big analogy was always R2-D2 versus C-3PO, because C-3PO is humanoid, R2-D2 obviously isn't.
But R2-D2 is useful, right? He can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, I mean, C-3PO is useful if you didn't make him a protocol droid, I guess.
Maybe.
Okay, so what led to, so I think most people were in that R2-D2 space, so how do you, what happened that humanoid robots are now more useful than they used to be?
Well, the things that have happened, and this is more than just this year, but it's been building up to this, is that the actuators have gotten better, more lightweight, more capable.
Okay.
The ability to balance and do locomotion with legged robots in general, and bipeds in particular, has absolutely gotten better. And the humanoid form factor, obviously, they're no longer roughly humanoid. Many of them look more and more. They've added heads and arms and things that make them easier to anthropomorphize.
Okay.
And that has captured the public imagination. It captures the media imagination. I would still argue that it's early days in terms of actual utility for humanoid robots. There's actually only one company that is doing any kind of commercial trials right now.
Yep.
And that's Agility Robotics.
Okay. So talk about Agility Robotics then. What they found a space in the warehouse environment, correct?
Right. Well, what they did that most of the other humanoids have not done yet is they combine legged locomotion with manipulation, right? So their robot can lift boxes or totes and move them from the back of a truck to a conveyor belt.
Right.
And they've been in trials with Amazon and now GXO Logistics, which is a big step forward, no pun intended, for humanoid robots. Most of the others that we've seen, including Optimus from Tesla and a lot of the others, they're still showing that they can walk and maybe chew gum at the same time.
Yeah.
And so they have a ways to go yet. It's a remarkable achievement, but we're not as mature yet. So people see humanoids and like, oh, this is great. They can do all these things. Yeah, Atlas can do parkour from Boston Dynamics, which is amazing. And it did have a really great video this year on a simulated construction site, right? It was jumping and running and tossing a bag of tools. That is an accomplishment, but that's not the same thing as something that's out in commercial trials.
Right. And the biggest industry sector for robotics has always been either manufacturing. So you think of car production, factory floor, those giant robot arms that are picking up car doors and building cars and things like that. But the other one was then supply chain and warehouse robotics. Again, thanks to Amazon and all of the mobile, automated mobile robots, and they can move around a warehouse, but you still need people to pick up a box or an item from a shelf and put it on the robot. So do you think Agility has mastered that? They don't have heads, right? They just have arms and legs.
Actually, they now have heads that they've mounted like cameras and other things in.
All right. But they certainly don't look like a typical robot, like a humanoid robot. Like
they look somewhere in between the autonomous mobile robots and warehouse that you mentioned, and the much more humanoid Optimus or Atlas, where there's a identifiable head and shoulders and all that. But I would say that the achievement there is that they've moved forward with partners. Amazon's one of the biggest retailers in the world. Yeah. Right? So to be able to go public with that kind of relationship is an accomplishment. But again, it's still very early days, and the manipulation on that is still not as fine as human dexterity.
Yeah, so they could probably pick up a box because it just comes up like this and then picks the box up and moves it.
Right.
If there's a phone in a bin somewhere, that robot's not going to be able to pick that up, right? No. But there are some that can pick up small items, but those are usually robot arms, right?
Right. And mobile manipulation is something that people have been working on for a long time, but it's noteworthy that a lot of the companies that started out in that space, like Fetch and IM Robotics, got out and are now focusing either on AMRs, mobile robots, or on software, because as it turns out, mobile manipulation is fairly challenging.
Will there be a standard type of robot that you see at some point? From a hardware perspective, obviously the growth of the PC industry is because there was not like 17 different style. I mean, it's still a personal computer, and then you have different branding and things like that. But everyone knows that a computer is, usually a screen and a keyboard and a mouse and some storage. Like, you never see that with robotics. You always see wacky different designs, and again, depending on what market they want to go to. Do you ever think it's going to consolidate to something where it's a single robot?
I think there is some consolidation in the mobile robot space.
Yeah. And that's usually a box on wheels, right?
Right. So that there is, it's not commoditized yet, but it's moving in that direction. And there are standards being developed to deal with those kinds of robots. For humanoids, it's still way too early. I mean, ASTM International is working on a legged robot safety standard, and that's certainly very important work. But for the platform to be stabilized, you have to have one that's recognized by the industry as being useful and affordable and functional, and we're not there yet.
Is there growth in the four-legged robot space with, what do they call them, quadrupeds?
Yes, there is.
Because I remember right before I came back to this show, that was one of the areas we were looking into of success, maybe crawling around tunnels or getting to areas that a regular two-person or two-legged human can't get to. Did you see some growth there, or was that still very niche-y?
So two things have happened. One is that Boston Dynamics with Spot has actually unveiled sensor packages and manipulation package, and they can now do inspection and even go out and read gauges in an oil rig or something like installation like that. So that's, again, commercial progress. In terms of technology, a number of companies are now coming out with cheaper quadrupeds. Yeah. And while those quadrupeds haven't really been put to work yet, it's easier to build on those platforms.
Yeah. So why was there a slowdown in, was it just a general slowdown in e-commerce meant that you didn't need as many robots in the warehouse filling orders, or because I thought with the supply chain disruptions that we had post-pandemic that you would find growth areas for mobile robots to fill those orders faster. What happened where that market is now not as hot as it used to be?
Well, first, e-commerce, everyone thought we're going to have 10x growth indefinitely at the end of the pandemic, and obviously that wasn't going to happen. And then secondly, if roughly 70% of American warehouses are not automated yet, the big 3PLs, the big retailers or e-tailers, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Amazons of the world, they already have robots, right? But getting to the next tier down, small and mid-size, those environments are much more non-standardized, and they didn't have the capital to invest in AMR fleets.
Okay.
And AMR fleet prices were not coming down and weren't being structured in such a way to serve that segment of the market yet. There's been progress in fleet management. There's been progress in robotics as a service models.
Yep.
But the slowdown in demand really tightened everyone's purse strings. And so they had to slow down in production. And people had overextended. A lot of the companies that ran into trouble this year were just burning cash. They had been running on fumes throughout the pandemic. And then finally, when inflation and unemployment pressures hit, there were mass layoffs. Even though everyone claims that there are still labor shortages in manufacturing and supply chain and other industries, the ability to serve those industries was also hampered.
Yeah, so I saw that Amazon, there was a big story in the Wall Street Journal a couple months ago where it felt like they were doubling down on their robotics play as well. They always had the systems that they would have this little small mobile robot, would pick up the giant case of all the products and then move it to a packing station, and that's where a human would pick and pack. But now I think the newer ones are now integrated more of a warehouse automation type of layout. Like this was probably about 2 months ago. Do you remember what I'm referencing?
So, Amazon bought Kiva in 2012 and helped create
this market,
AMR market by pulling them out of it.
Yeah.
And then more recently, they have introduced smaller, more nimble mobile robots.
Okay.
A lot of them are still not in collaborative applications with humans, but they're able to move different types of payloads. And most recently, they are also announcing robot arms. Now, Amazon has been actively investigating all kinds of robots, right? Pickers and goods to person, and all those. But for them to publicly announce it means that they feel, okay, this is ready to scale, and we're going to put thousands of these things out. And so that definitely shows that there is maturity, there is demand. And if they're doing it, you can be sure everyone else is looking at it. But it coincided, like they can afford to spend the money on it.
Yeah.
It coincided with everyone else, again, really struggling. We talked about Six River Systems.
Yeah.
And they ran into a problem. They'd been bought by Shopify for a pretty good valuation. And then when they changed hands again this year to Ocado, they laid off most of their staff. And even though their product was good, there was the feeling in the industry at that moment. It's like, well, yeah, the demand is still out there, but where is the retrenching going on? Now, it turns out in their case, it was not just about demand for AMRs. It was probably more about what was happening to Shopify.
Yeah, and so with Amazon too, and I was covering this from a higher level view of the whole technology company landscape. It felt like there was a big push against Amazon for companies like Temu and Shein, it's Shein. It's the Chinese-based companies. Yes. And so they've got these giant e-commerce sites that can produce, like the products that they sell are very inexpensive. Some would say cheap. But if you're looking for price versus speed of getting it delivered, some of these Chinese-based sites are fine. I was like, I'm fine on getting this product in 2 weeks rather than that 2-day, 1-day system. So it felt that Amazon was doubling down on this. They still believe that speed is more important than price at this point. And quality, I guess you could argue too.
Well, and then there's that competitive advantage. Amazon is not the upstart anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
So now you've got all these upstarts going after the big dog.
Right. And so Amazon is committed to its business model. And for a while there at the end of the pandemic, everyone's like, oh, we need to buy American because, we got into all these trade conflicts right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And at the same time, post-pandemic, you're absolutely right. China says, you know what, we can still compete on price. We can still compete on availability of goods. And we don't have to worry about antitrust scrutiny. Mm-hmm. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because for all of the talk about reshoring and nearshoring, most of that is actually about production of chips and other strategic supplies.
Right.
But when we're talking about apparel, if you're talking about food in some cases, we're still a global
You still can't compete
market.
with China on
We
some
still
of those
can't
things.
compete with certain markets for scale.
Okay. Generative AI was a big story in the IT space and even, around the world, consumer tech, all that other stuff. I kept figuring that we would see stories or companies or research about merging the generative AI capabilities of a ChatGPT into a physical form of a robot where you could now ask a robot for a question and it would give you a response and you would have that personal interaction. But I never saw anything unless there's some small companies out there that are doing it. I just didn't feel, it was just like, where are these things? Is it because robot development takes so long that's why we're not seeing them yet? Or we might be seeing them down the road, or it's just a use case that's not very useful?
A little bit of all of the above.
Okay.
So a lot of the social robots that are out there
Yeah.
have been in development for a while. And so you have to figure whatever engine they were using for that human-machine interaction was already in the works.
Right.
I mean, we have to remember, ChatGPT's only been out for a year, which
Yeah.
in tech time is very fast.
Sure.
And so that's part of it. The other part of it is that a lot of people are looking at ChatGPT not for human-machine interaction, but to automatically generate code or
Okay.
to help generate design.
And so that's where you're
different.
seeing it in the robotic space?
We're seeing a little bit of it there.
Yeah.
That the human-machine interaction, I still think, is the area where it makes the most sense
Right.
in the short term to have natural speech or text interaction.
Right.
with
And
a
the
robot.
biggest case of that, the biggest example of that was Pepper, right? You've probably seen the Pepper robot out there.
It has new owners. So
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's the problem with that company is they keep getting new owners. Like,
yeah, it's now United Robotics Group.
okay.
So that humanoid service robot and consumer-facing robot is going to continue.
Yeah.
And it will probably get, enhanced interactive abilities. But I don't think that's the area where ChatGPT is most promising. I think there is beginning to be research on how to apply it to, again, generate a robotic code.
Right.
And no one is saying, we should rely on this exclusively yet, right? We all know that. And there's been a lot of discussion about AI, robotics, AI, ethics, and
Yeah.
that's still developing. But I do think that ChatGPT, also because it's so general, right? It has crawled all of these sites to get information.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the specialist knowledge that robotics developers need.
Can it write code for the robotic operating system for
ROS?
For ROS, yeah.
There are experiments where it has generated some.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's necessarily better than what's already out there for beginning coders to get to use it.
Right. So, and again, I guess it depends on the area of ChatGPT that you're looking for because it can do so many different things.
Right.
If I had a few bucks, I'd be like, I would integrate it with some of these image drawing capabilities and have a robot do the drawing for you.
There are already
Good at trade shows, at least.
there are already some things like that
Yeah.
where you can send ChatGPT and it will create things, but it hasn't happened on the scale that you're talking about yet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, is there going to be a reckoning in the robotics space when it comes to all of the money that was being invested? I guess are we going to hit a point where we might see it go off the cliff, or is it just going to be a refresh reboot with a lot of these things?
I think we're already in what Gartner calls a tropic disillusionment. I think we've already gone off.
You've hit that, yeah.
That some of the hype around robotics and AI has already resulted in layoffs, as I said, in the first half of this year, the end of last year, in the robotics space. It's also resulted in venture capital firms being much more selective. They want to see proof of concept beyond. They want to see, can you be marketable? Can you be commercially successful?
Yeah.
And that's hard if you're a small startup that came out of a university or incubator. There is, we'll talk about autonomous vehicles, right? Talking about that drying up really fast.
Yeah.
They got billions of dollars. There have been some serious safety incidents. And we don't really know what the fate of Cruise is going to be.
Well, let's just go right into. Let's just talk about the autonomous car stuff. Lots of big, high-profile bad news. GM, Cruise. I think they were forced to shut down, or at least shut down their operations in San Francisco, at least in California, because there were a couple of incidents. The one that we remember that we talked about on the show was a car was swerving to avoid a hit and run, and then ended up trapping someone under the car.
Yeah.
I've seen other ones where it drove through a concrete drying space, like they were doing some sidewalk work or road work, and it went through the orange cones. Those were pretty high profile. But then even recently, the long-term trucking space, like the mid-mile.
The middle mile, and even the long haul trucking.
Long haul trucking. That's the term. Like, there's only really two big companies that are left doing any kind of work in this space: Aurora and Kodiak. Too Simple just announced they're shutting down. So what happened in the autonomous vehicle space? Because everyone was like, "Yeah, we're going to be getting in those robot cars pretty soon."
Well, again, I do want to point out that robotaxi deployments are still happening in Vegas and Arizona and elsewhere.
Very dry climates where you have very, little weather.
We won't be seeing them here in Boston too soon.
Oh, good.
Well, it turns out they add to traffic. So
okay.
But the other things that happened is there was a chill in terms of, even before these safety incidents happened, regulators are like, we're not sure where this fits in to our scheme. Mm-hmm. We've been hearing about, in San Francisco, cars stopping in the middle of intersections and just blocking traffic, right? Or adding to traffic. In the trucking space, the Teamsters came out, in California in particular, against autonomous trucking.
Okay.
And the industry didn't react well enough to say, okay, how do we get them on board? How do we work with them to say this is not going to threaten you? Because there's still going to be that last mile.
Sure.
They're still going to need to have a human to bring things into cities and more complex environments. But the other thing is that hardware is hard. And the time frames for autonomous vehicles and trucking included just kept getting pushed out. And investors got impatient. And regulators started to circle around. And I still think there's a lot of promise. I actually think that autonomous trucking is a more promising area of AVs than passenger cars.
Right.
You can operate them at scale as fleets. You can manage them more centrally. You can have them on these long haul stretches where there isn't a lot of obstacles or traffic to deal with.
Yeah. Will we see still something like the shuttle space? Like if you're at an airport and you have to get from one terminal to the other, usually you take a bus.
Yeah.
Is that still, where it's a limited, where you've got a little gated area? Will that be something that happens down the road?
We see shuttles being very active in retirement communities, on college campuses, and airports, because those are constrained setting. You map it once.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about, most of the time, you don't have to worry about random traffic. But at the same time, the bar for safety is very high. And unlike a delivery robot, which even those have gotten into problems.
Yeah, that's another. It's another checklist on my list here of delivery robots. That seemed like every college campus was getting one, but now is it just that they're all out there, so it's not that exciting, or is there a downturn in that segment too?
I think there's a little bit of a downturn there as well. One, the novelty has worn off, and the fleets that are operating on campuses are still operating, but there is also the issue of, at some point, you have to figure out what is the economics of it. Most of these are teleoperated, so there are still humans behind them. Most of them still have a fairly high degree of support and maintenance involved, right? It's not like your local fast food chain can just operate them on their own. And so the partnerships between the developers of delivery robots, whether they're sidewalk or street driven, and the customers that they were working with, those are short-term deals to just trial it.
Right, okay.
And so to do it again at a larger scale or in more dynamic environments, they're not ready yet.
Right. I think where I saw one in the wild, we were at Bridgewater State University locally here, and I was parking and we were walking to a theater on campus, and as we were crossing, I saw it was Starships, and there were 3 of them that went by, just like, boom, boom, boom. And then Chris, our other co-host on the show, was like, why don't people just pick these things up and just take the food? Obviously, they're locked, and you'd have to kind of jimmy, and they've got cameras on and stuff, but then you're ruining the food inside, whatever, eventually if you're shaking it or trying to get it open.
I'm sure college kids have already come up with lots of creative ways.
Oh, yeah, the college kids step in front of it just to torture it type of thing.
And I'm sure there's been where they steal them and put them in some other part of campus to see if they'll find their way and all that stuff. Cameras are to help with that level of security. The bigger problem is, and this goes for drone delivery as well.
You're just reading my mind. That's my next question.
Is that
let's talk about drones. Yeah.
With drones, again, there's been progress continues to be made on that. But at the same time, where is that progress being made? It's been made on the commercial inspection side. It's been made in agriculture. But to deliver things, you're limited in range still.
Yeah.
You're limited in regulation, permitting. Now, the FAA is coming around, but it's still, you have to get
Will we ever see
waiver.
Amazon Prime Air doing these drone deliveries that they were supposed to be sparking that whole revolution from that? Remember that 60 Minutes piece? Yeah.
We won't be seeing a helicarrier of Amazon deliveries anytime soon.
Well, I was always figuring that the noise alone would be annoying enough to get communities to be like, no, we don't want any of that because it's loud. And then the battery life, it just seems like you have to be really, really local.
You have to be local. And there's also, like, you're not going to drop a TV on someone. There's a limited payload.
Right.
So
But Amazon says 75 or 80% of our goods we can deliver via drone. And, in their press releases, they're saying that. Obviously, I'm not going to order a TV and expect it to be.
That's true. But at the same time, where are you delivering it to? Like a suburban neighborhood, an inner suburb, you can do it. An outer suburb, the distances become too great.
Yeah.
An urban area, you don't have enough drop zones that are not included, or flying in a crowded street is going to be much more challenging. So there is a limit to where these things can operate. The guidance systems have improved tremendously. The assisted autonomy, before you used to really have to pilot and compensate for every gust of wind and all that, that's no longer true. So progress continues to be made, but in terms of will we all see them in the coming year, I think it's unlikely.
Yeah. So it's going to be more of the same, like small projects, small pilots, a
lot of incremental change. I would say even this past year, we saw some new products, certainly. But was there a whole new category of products that came out? It's hard to say. Humanoids is the closest thing to that.
Right.
And those have been in the works for a long time.
Which is why the media is then excited about it, because there's like, something new.
Right.
Something that we haven't seen before. Remember that, what was it, that Amazon dog, that little dog, Astro? Is that what they were calling it?
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a consumer tech device. It was like Alexa on wheels type of a thing. I saw a story like they're now putting that to work as a security robot. Did you see that announcement?
See that. And a lot of that is, we've seen a number of pivots in the drone space, from hobbyist to commercial and back again, and industrial.
Security, inspection, yeah.
And during the pandemic, you saw a lot of mobile robots being used for disinfection, right?
That's right. I forgot about the disinfection robot space.
It's a worthy thing, but
it is, but only when you have things that need to be disinfected.
And it turns out hospitals are pretty complicated environments, because you don't want to be hitting plastic things with UV light, among other things, and certainly don't want to be hitting people with it. But in the case of the surface robots, again, there is progress, whether it's for therapy or assistive robots. But the idea of having something that is mobile and can interact with the user and has some higher level data collection features, it's been a tough nut to crack. Even iRobot, which is arguably the most well-known consumer robot company in the world, they had said, we're going to map the home, which is great, and then we're going to collect data, and then they ran it right into privacy issues.
Especially in Europe, like they're holding up, they're trying to hold up that the purchase of iRobot by Amazon because of some of these data privacy concerns.
Right. Yeah. And it's not to say that it's not a worthy thing that they're trying to do, but they didn't anticipate running into those headwinds.
Yeah. Like that reminded me, when you were talking about service robots, that made me think of the robot waiters that were supposed to be replacing all of these, not replacing, but supplementing. There was a shortage of restaurant workers, in this pandemic / post-pandemic world. And so everyone was thinking, well, we've got people that can make the food, but we don't have a lot of people that can deliver it. So let's have these these carts on wheels, and they would bring the food to your table. And then I guess the humans at some point take the food off or put their dirty dishes on and bus it.
There are a couple of restaurants here in the area that do that.
Oh, really? Which ones? I should go there at some point.
There's a sushi place in Framingham and an Italian place a little further out.
All right.
And we'll have to go there.
Okay.
But it turns out, in terms of food automation,
right.
Obviously, there's a lot on the back end in terms of food processing and preparation. All the fast food chains are actively investigating food preparation robots.
Right.
Because the kitchen is really where they have a shortage of turnover in people.
Yeah.
But it turns out that the little carts, which are hugely popular in Asia, are not so popular here. The labor shortage has eased a little bit.
Yeah.
in the restaurant industry. And then second, people like that human contact at the point of sale.
Right.
And so,
But I remember seeing a Chinese company was bragging that they had mastered the idea of not only just bringing the food out, but then having a robot arm actually place the thing on the table. I'm like, that'll never work in America because people have so much junk on their table. You couldn't find an open space, or they would ask the customer to sort of move, and it's like that's just a recipe for disaster.
plus having an arm with a hot plate of food and anything with children running around.
Oh yeah,
it's
of course.
a bad idea.
Yeah. But there, are companies like Miso Robotics still doing their restaurant automation with? I think the first one they had was Flippy. It did hamburgers,
Flippy, yep.
and then they went into the chicken. They went into the deep fryer space
yep.
with chicken nuggets and fries and things like that. There's still interest in the food automation portion of it.
Absolutely, still is interest.
Yeah.
And I don't know when that will come to fruition, but you can be sure that every fast food chain is testing it and looking at it very hard. But there's also been setbacks. For every pizza making robot that's out there, or salad dispensing or bowl dispensing robot that's out there, there's a company like Spice, which is based here in Boston, that was not successful, or that got bought up, in this case, by Sweetgreen, right? And they've absorbed the technology and they're starting to repurpose it for themselves.
Yeah.
But in terms of server robots,
Okay.
you're right. It's difficult. It's
But
challenging.
even those food automation companies have issues of scale, right? Like it's very hard to mass produce those types of things.
Well, that's why they start out with things like pizza or food bowls where you dispense it. Is that really robotics? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's not the same thing as a mobile robot with an arm that can plop a plate of food in front of you.
All right. So you eat all that food and you get unhealthy. Now you've got to go to the healthcare arena. There have been some robots in the healthcare space. Is that still growing, or is that still kind of plateauing?
So surgical robotics is still growing.
Okay.
But slowly, because the time to get regulatory approvals from the FDA is very challenging. But there are more and more procedures that can be done. Obviously intuitive surgical and vicarious surgical, those big guys, they have abdominal procedures, but we're now starting to get into other
And it depends
areas.
on the types of surgery that you're doing. Like the easy stuff was the first stuff that you would get, but then you get more complicated and you're like, I'd rather have a surgeon do that.
Well, joint replacement is now largely automated.
Largely robotic,
and prostate surgery is also largely, but there are other areas that are more challenging to get to, or where it's like, okay, how much do we still need a surgeon or human in the loop, and how close do you want that surgeon to be to the actual patient? I've certainly participated in experiments to do teleoperation at distance, and the military is very interested in that.
Yeah.
But by and large, if you need something done, you're going to go to a doctor in a regular hospital. And the unit price on these surgical systems is still relatively high. And so there is progress, but it's not at the scale of like Amazon, which has thousands, tens of thousands of robots. A few hundred robots, each worth $1 million, is going to be a different market. We're also starting to see more and more in the therapeutic space, whether we're talking about that social robot interaction or the kinds of robots that are more like exoskeletons that they help people recover from stroke and other
rehabilitation
conditions.
type robots.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you're also seeing some mobile robots in space, like things that can deliver dirty linens and food back to the cafeteria, things like that. Or robots that help nurses so that nurses can do less of their tedious work. And
although that's actually moving slower than I would have thought. And again, that's because when you're dealing with different healthcare providers, you have to find one that is open to new technology, one that can get the insurance reimbursements or figure out the payment scheme, and then identify the logistics application. If you're talking about moving medication or dirty linens through a hospital, it's very different from moving it through a factory or a warehouse.
Right.
And so, because you're dealing not only with people who are trained to be around robots, but the general public.
Yep. Any other areas that are interesting or growing? Agriculture, space. Like, what other hot areas do you think that we will see additional robotics interest and innovation?
So agriculture is one where there's a lot of interest.
Yeah.
I would say it's still, again, very early days for them. That they're, with John Deere getting into it, obviously that changes the equation. It's a little bit like Amazon getting into warehouse robotics.
Right.
So it's coming, but there are so many different applications. I was at a meetup last night, and people were saying, "Oh, we backed off from fruit picking," which is what a lot of the early robots, because it's a hard challenge.
Yeah.
And then you have to design a different robot for every type of fruit.
All I can imagine is this big robot arm going squish, go oops, squish.
You can do better. We have grippers and so on, sensors that are better.
Right.
But it's still a challenge in terms of, what are you harvesting? And you have to be in the field. So these robots have to be food safe or sealed, but they also have to be able to endure the elements.
Yeah.
And so we're not seeing as much of that, but we are seeing mobile robots move into that area, or ground robots. And drones, certainly for precision agriculture, are well established at this point. Aerospace, both for the
Oh yeah, we didn't get into that.
for the area of exploration of outer
Yep.
space, which
Yep.
is continuing apace, and Artemis should yield new things with continuing launches. But then on the ground, in terms of aerospace, the ability to manufacture
Okay.
items with novel architectures is something that not only 3D printing can help, but robotics as well.
Okay.
And so there is, I would say, a growing area there.
I thought you were, when you said aerospace, that made me think of the urban air mobility and these unmanned drones, from if you're in the middle of Manhattan, you need to get to the Hamptons, you hop on one of these unmanned drones. Is that still a thing, or is that hit some, regulation requirements? And weren't there some flying taxis in Dubai and some of those areas?
And I think they still have them.
Yeah.
But again, the ability for those it turns out, as you may have read recently, that the air traffic controllers are again overstrained.
Okay.
And if we don't have the infrastructure to keep track of our existing jets, I don't think we want to add a whole nother layer of travel right yet.
Yeah.
But the idea of having smaller regional airports served by semi-autonomous craft, that's happening. But the area, oddly enough, where there has been an uptick is old school manufacturing. Automotive. As the whole automotive industry switches over or begins to transition to electric vehicles, they have to retool their factories. And with trying to reshore microprocessor production to the U.S., again, there's a new wave of interest in not the sexy humanoid robots, but the very
traditional,
traditional. There's an uptick in demand for that. And then, other areas of interest, I would say that if you look, maybe not this coming year, but a little bit farther out, it's not just surface robots, but it's robots that are behind the scenes. It's that middle layer of inventory, right? Of stocking and restocking and things like that.
Yeah, like
in warehouses, you have that threshold between the warehouse and the truck, right? That loading dock area. There's a lot of activity, a lot of interest in research going on in there.
So a truck rolls up to a grocery store and you've got it's full of pallets. That's being automated?
There are projects in the work to try to automate that, yes.
Yeah, and you're never going to see one actually packing the shelves, because I think that's just too hard.
It depends what you're, food,
Yeah.
Those are small items. But if you're doing shoe boxes.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Lots of stuff other to talk about. What do you think of 2023? It was kind of a mixed year. What do you think 2024 is going to bring? Will this space bounce back, or are we going to see still a lot of pullback from investment? And if you now using your crystal ball,
now looking at my crystal ball, there's a couple of things. Uncertainty given the geopolitical situation and upcoming U.S. elections, that's bad for business.
Yeah,
right?
I would say.
Because the defense industry, at the end of the day, and the lack of a centralized industrial policy in this country, they support a lot of the R&D, out of which comes robotics and drones and other things. And so that uncertainty is going to slow things down for a little while.
Yeah.
The economy, by contrast, even though inflation has been a real problem, it seems to be abating a little bit. Unemployment has not gone up significantly.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies are still complaining about shortages of the kind of skilled labor. And we're talking not necessarily about highly skilled labor. We're talking about people who actually have to move things around.
Right.
And the younger generation apparently doesn't want to do it as much. I don't blame them. But at the same time, you have to have, if you want your Amazon order to come, somebody has to move it around.
Yeah.
And so I think that the warehouse robotics space is likely to have an uptick. I think autonomous vehicles, they're going to have to restructure.
Yeah. And if it's what's interesting about the autonomous vehicle space is that a lot of the developments from the component level things like LiDAR and vision cameras and things like that, that helps spur the other robotics industry. So if that's going to be in trouble, that would spell trouble for all of these other robotics makers, right?
It would if you're expecting certain advances in LiDAR.
Yeah.
Like you want them to be cheaper at scale, sure.
Yeah. And is that happening? Is that still dry? Is the price of LiDAR still coming down?
It's coming down, maybe not as fast.
Yeah.
But the mobile robots that are out there already have established sensor suites, so that's not as much of an issue. But if you're trying to get robots into new spaces,
then it gets tricky.
and you want to have that level of navigation, and object detection, and obstacle avoidance, then what's happening is a lot of people are turning to the software side to solve that. Rather than the hardware side, where the timeframes are slower.
Right.
There's already been, and I think in the next year there will continue to be investment and interest in saying, okay, how do we apply AI? And not generative AI, but machine learning.
Machine learning, deep learning, all that stuff that was happening before the generative stuff came out.
But that's gotten a little bit of a funding boost.
Yeah.
How do we apply that in new ways? And you and I have talked before about the evolving software stack for mobile robots, but also for service robots.
Yeah.
That's going to continue. I think you'll see more differentiation on that side than on the hardware side in the coming years.
And the development of 5G networks will help too, correct? Like,
yes.
As again, the communication between a system and the cloud is going to be better, but most of that's going to be moving to the edge anyway.
Well, and even
because of 5G.
Even in the case of again, let's take mobile robots in the warehouse. If you can have a local 5G network, right? It's not going to be exposed to the world.
Right.
But you do get better throughput. You do enable that centralization of compute so that way you're not worrying as much about power on the endpoint.
Yeah.
Right? And there's also novel charging solutions out there as well because power and weight are the enemies of robotics and drones.
Okay.
And if you can offload that in any way, so much the better.
All right. Gene Demetri, good stuff. If you're interested in robotics, go to the Robot Report and all their other sites that they've got there. They're covering the market constantly and with quality stuff. So, Gene, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That's all the time we have for today's episode. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, add any thoughts that you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.